Hello YouTube, this is my Commander guide for 2026. I believe Commander is one of the most misunderstood roles in the game, and the primary goal of this channel is to help players improve at Hell Let Loose, so I hope that this guide helps to correct some common Commander mistakes that I see. All of the information in this video is solely my opinion, but that is an opinion based on about 7,000 hours of play spread across both public and competitive matches. I'll first be talking about all of the Commander abilities, what they do, if they're good or bad, and how to best utilize them. I will then be talking about Garrison Networks, which is the Commander's first and most important job, and just strategy about how to construct healthy Garrison Networks. And lastly, I'll talk about communication and more generally how to use your time in-game as the Commander role. And a couple of notes for the strategies I talk about in this video. This is for warfare. Offensive mode is similar but a little different in some of the strategy. This is all for warfare, and this is for public games. This is not a guide for Commander play in competitive games, though some of the same ideas might still apply. Competitive is a completely different game. Okay, the strategy that works with a organized 50-man team is not the same strategy that works with a random group of public players. I'll also be operating from a place where the teams are relatively even in theory, right? In Hell Let Loose, there's often kind of a good team and a bad team, and there are a variety of reasons for this. But there's oftentimes kind of a discrepancy in the experience level between the two teams. Some of the stuff I'm describing, it might not make sense if you think about it from the perspective of like the really good team that's just like stomping the other team. We're talking about if the teams are even, or if you're playing on a slightly worse team, what's going to work as the most optimal strategy. You can use the timestamps in the video description to switch between the different sections. And if you're enjoying my videos, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I will also try to respond to any questions and comments in the comment section of the video. So Commander resource management is one of the things that kind of makes or breaks your skill level as a commander. Commonly, I see people wasting their resources, using abilities in a very inefficient way that puts them at a disadvantage. But I also see at times the opposite problem of commanders kind of hoarding their abilities and not using them enough. The hypothetical ideal for commanding is to be able to use your abilities when you need them in the most efficient way possible throughout the match, and then end the game with close to zero of all of your resources because they've been used kind of to optimal efficiency. In practice, you're not usually going to end the game with zero resources. It's actually generally better to have resources in reserve just in case of emergencies. But figuring out the balance of that is probably the number one kind of skill set a commander has to develop to really truly be like above the level of the average commander. The first ability we're going to discuss is Airheads. So Airhead drops a spawn anywhere on the map in the active sectors, so the first two red zones and any of the blue zone. It's a temporary spawn that your team can use for the duration of the Airhead. Airhead is a good ability. However, it is severely misused by the average pub commander. Some examples of bad uses of airheads. One, oftentimes commanders will just try to drop sort of a naked airhead with no protection in the backline. This is not a good idea. Any good team is going to just kind of sweep up the airhead and take it out. An airhead with no protection is just kind of a waste of 400 resources, 400 manpower. Another bad use I'll commonly see is to drop them extremely far away from anything relevant. Again, you really don't want to have any kind of spawn point this far away from the defense and the offense kind of sector. And a slightly more high level bad use of the Airhead is the Airhead bombing run, where commanders will drop an airhead. They'll then put a bombing run over the airhead. The timing is about halfway through the airhead duration. As it's falling, you trigger the bombing run so that the bombs hit alongside the airhead. This is just a colossal cost of resources for something that really is never going to work versus a good team. Good players are aware that if they see an airhead just falling down near their hard cap or wherever it is, that it's likely a bombing run is coming with it, they'll just get out of the way and grenade it. So generally this is just a waste of resources. Another common bad use of the airhead is to try to use it to sort of leapfrog into the next point after you've just captured another point. You're most vulnerable right after a capture. You want to be establishing defensive networks and not just running off the point. So this often can result in just losing your defensive point. It's just not a good use of the airhead. The best use of the airhead is to support an existing push. So for example, if I was playing this map, my team is attacking from, let's say, here, and they're going into Hamlet. If my team were to, let's say, push in and they've established maybe, they've got to this section of the map and they've got an OP up, they're controlling it, and we've pushed the enemies back a little bit, I might then drop an airhead where they have control so that they can protect it on the way down. We reinforce the push where it's already strong, kind of overload the enemy on the front line. Something like this, where it's coordinating with your already existing push, it's protected, this is a good use of the airhead. The next ability is Dismantle Garrison. This is pretty straightforward. You can use it to dismantle any existing garrison on the map. It does cost 100 manpower. It can be useful when you need to get rid of a garrison to move up another garrison. You can only have 8 on the map, so it is sometimes important to quickly get rid of a Gary. However, it's ideal for a commander to just manually dismantle a garrison. Commanders can walk up to any garrison on the map and just hold F on it to dismantle it. This is also true for SLs, but they can only dismantle garrisons that they themselves have made. Commanders can dismantle any garrison. So if you have the option, if you have the time, it's preferable to not waste the 100 manpower and dismantle it manually. Next ability is Reinforce. So Reinforce doubles the cap weight of any friendly infantry inside of a strong point or inside of this circle on the defensive point. This is a good ability. It is important, but you have to understand how it works. So quick lesson on cap weight in this game. Every person in the game is worth 1 cap weight when they're inside the defensive sector or the attacking sector, which means the 4 squares around the circle. When they go inside of the circle, they're then worth 3 cap weight. So Reinforce doubles the cap weight of only the people inside the circle. So they would be worth 6 cap weight. It does not do anything if nobody is in the circle. Okay, sometimes I'll see commanders use this when nobody's around. They have people over here maybe, but there's nobody here. It doesn't do anything until there are people in the circle. It's important to use when you need to buy time, your defensive point is getting pressured, maybe you're in a cap race. It does cost 200 munitions, so it's not cheap. And just be aware that you want to have, 200 manpower. You want to have manpower available, especially towards the end of the game, to have access to this in case you need it to defend the point. Next ability is Encourage. This is a very good ability. It doubles the generation of all of your nodes. So each node gives you 10 resources. When you use Encourage, each node then gives you 20 resources per minute. It's best to use this when you have full set of nodes, so 3 sets of each node. You can sometimes use it if you have 2, if you're just trying to generate resources. It does cost a lot of manpower. It's 400 manpower, but you essentially want to be using this every single time it's available when you have full resources. It will greatly increase your overall pool of resources throughout the game. Each section of abilities also has a generate different resource ability, so manpower, munitions, fuel each have one of these. I'm not going to talk about them in each section. They are useful when you need to swap around resources. For example, if I'm like 60 fuel away from a heavy tank, generate fuel would be useful to suddenly, be able to have the heavy sooner. Just have to determine, when it makes sense to swap them around. Now for munitions abilities, the first one is ammo drop. So this drops a crate onto the map that primarily gives you explosive ammo. It also gives you regular ammo and also medical supplies, which are not useful in this game. You're very rarely running out of ammo, and medics are basically not even a thing in this game. The primary use is explosive ammo. This is a bad ability. First of all, it costs too much. It's too expensive. It's 100 munitions. If you want more explosive ammo on the map, the best thing to do is to use a Jeep, which is 80 fuel, and you can essentially drop unlimited explosive ammo across the map on it, and Jeeps are fun. The only other use of ammo drop is to use it alongside of a supply drop. I have a YouTube short that I'll link in the description about how to do this trick, but essentially if you layer them over each other, you can cause them to collide mid-air, and then they will fall without the parachutes. This is still something that, it's questionable if this is worth it, but if you're trying to hide your supply drop, it can be useful. Next ability is supply drop. This is the most important ability a commander has. It is the strongest ability a commander has. For 50 munitions, you can drop a supply drop anywhere on the map that contains 100 supplies. This is vital for establishing your garrison network. You want to be using this every single time it's off cooldown. As a commander, you do not need to wait to hear from your squad leads where to drop supplies. You should just be looking on the map, and anywhere where you don't have a garrison, you want to be dropping supplies. Just repeatedly, you can drop backup supplies in your defensive sectors. You generally want to be using this in the blue, and we'll talk about red zone garrisons later, but use this ability every single time it's up. It's the strongest ability by far that a commander has. Next ability is Recon Planes. So Recon Planes can drop sort of this rectangle across the map, and it will reveal any enemy infantry and enemy vehicles inside the path of the plane. Recon Planes are a bad ability. A lot of people really like this ability. It is a waste of resources probably 90% of the time you're using it. First of all, it's expensive. So it's 150 munitions. Munitions is a very valuable resource we need for things like bombing runs and precision strikes and supply drops. 150 munitions is a steep cost for what this does. The other reason that it is bad is because it's not giving any kind of useful information most of the time. As a good player in this game, you can look at the map and you can determine probably where the enemies are. You can get a general idea of where spawn points and enemies are located just by glancing at the map for 5 seconds. So most of the time when I use this, I'm essentially paying 150 munitions to give me information that I can get by just looking at the map for 10 seconds. Another very bad use of this ability that I see is people will drop the recon plane, and then they will try to use it to help target their bombing runs, to help aim the bombing run. We'll talk more about bombing runs, but this is very bad. First of all, when you see the red dots on the recon plane and then try to drop the bombing run over it, by the time the bombs hit, the people on the recon plane are going to likely be moved on. And you don't want to be using bombing runs to target random infantry anyway. The one use the recon plane can have is to try to highlight for your team enemy flanks that might be coming. Like, the best use of this is probably to drop it across like the back line every once in a while if you think that, oh, suddenly there's this secret flank that's developing from the enemies. That can be a good use of it. A lot of times I'll see people just do for these diagonal points like this diagonal recon plane, and it's like, spoilers guys, there's going to be enemies here, there's going to be enemies here. you're not getting useful information from this. Every once in a while, you'll see a cluster of red dots on the recon plane, and then you can kind of guess probably that is a garrison or an outpost. But again, you have to just get lucky for that to happen, just with the timing of the recon plane. And also, it's nothing that a good player isn't already probably going to have an idea of anyway. Recon planes are a bad ability. They should definitely not be being used as much as I see them being used in the average pub game. Next ability is Precision Strike. So this drops in a small targeted area a bomb that can kill spawn points, it can kill vehicles. Precision Strike is a good ability. It is an expensive ability, though. It's 250 munitions, and it has a very long cooldown. So it's like a 20-minute cooldown. I think that is probably the longest cooldown of any ability in the game. So the reason Precision Strike is a good ability is because it has the capability of killing heavy tanks. And this is the primary way you should be using it, is to target armor, but more particularly heavy tanks. You don't have a lot of options for dealing with heavy tanks. You have your heavy tanks, you have AT players, and then you have Precision Strike. This ability can also target garrisons. Because it has such a long cooldown, and it is one of your few ways of dealing with tanks, I very rarely want to be targeting a garrison with this. If it's a very important garrison, if I think it's a garrison that if I take out I'm going to cap a point, or if I take out I'm going to save my point, I can think about using this. The other thing about the Precision Strike, though, is that it's somewhat unreliable. You can change the direction the missile is coming from by clicking on it. So the arrow is the direction the missile is going to fly in from. And this can help to target, garrison. Say if there was a garrison at this building, right? I wouldn't want to have it coming from this side of the building. I'd want to put it here and then have it coming like something like this. But I would generally only be using this ability for tanks. I do not want to be trying to target garrisons most of the time with it unless it's a very particularly important garrison at the right moment. Next ability is Strafing Runs. So for 150 munitions, this will shoot this kind of line over the map that kills infantry. It does not kill spawn points, and because it doesn't kill spawn points, it's one of the worst abilities in the game. You should basically never be using Strafing Runs. There's very little consequence for dying in this game. There's a big consequence for losing your spawn point, but if you hit people with a Strafing Run, and most of the time on average you're probably getting 2 to 3 kills with a Strafing Run. A lot of time you're getting less than that, honestly. Every once in a while you might get like 5 kills with a Strafing Run. Even that is not worth it, because people can just respawn in the next 20-30 seconds. They'll be back on the map. The Strafing Run does have one possible use, and that's to defend locked defensive garries. So when I say a locked defensive garry, this garrison right here is locked because it's in this sector. The first 2 sectors of your defense point, anytime an enemy gets on a garry, they can dismantle it very quickly. Anything past the first 2 sectors, they have to take a much longer time to dismantle it. And when it's red, you can target it, zoom your map and target it with a Strafing Run and potentially kill them off of it while they're dismantling it. I see this done a lot. It's still a bad idea to do this most of the time. For one thing, because once the enemy is on the garry, they already know where it is. So it's oftentimes like a recon team back here dismantling your locked garries. They're just going to come back to it afterwards, right? Even if you killed them. The second reason is that good players know when they're on a locked garry that a Strafing Run might be coming. They're listening for the plane. They can hear it as it comes, and they can dodge it and then just get back on the garry, right? So if you have a very, very important garrison, like it's your only backup garry and you're losing your point or something, right? You can try maybe to strafe it to save it, but that's a very particular situation. Generally, I would not be using this. It's just too high of a cost. It probably doesn't work, and definitely probably doesn't work long term. In general, if you never use a Strafing Run in this game, that would be fine. You're doing well. Next ability is bombing runs. Bombing runs drop kind of this carpet bomb sort of explosion over a section of the map. Bombing run is a very good ability. It costs 300 munitions, so it's a steep cost. The reason bombing runs are good in comparison to something like strafing runs or artillery strikes, which we will talk about next, is that bombing runs kill garrisons. They do not kill outposts, but they kill garrisons. And this is vitally important for attacking and defending, to be taking out garrisons. So the proper use of a bombing run is to target a garrison. It's not to target random infantry. It's not to just throw it out whenever you see, a cluster of enemies. It's to target garrisons when your team is nearby so that they can take the space created by the bombing run, right? So for example, if I was attacking Hamlet, my team marks that there's a garrison in this common garrison spot. My team has pushed up. My team is getting into the attack over here, and we're pressuring the point. Once we take out this garrison, we will be capturing the point. I want to use the bombing run in a way where I'm going to not hit my teammates, and I'm going to take out the garrison. I'm just going to tell them to wait, push in after the bombing run, and they can take the space created by it, right? Another nuance of this is that if you're targeting something near your teammates, you want to have the bombing run going away from them and not towards them, like this, right? So that they can follow the bombing run in. One common misuse of the bombing run I see is that commanders will just throw it out there when there's no infantry nearby. This doesn't do anything if you don't have infantry nearby to take the space that it creates, right? Also, like I was talking about before, I'll see like Recon Plane, target the Recon Plane dots. Again, you want to be attacking garrisons with this, not anything else. Okay, garrisons may be a half-track. It can kill half-tracks. It doesn't do a lot to tanks. It can damage tanks, but usually it damages their tracks. Smaller tanks can get killed by it. You can also use this defensively if you really need to take out a Gary. Again, if there was a Gary here, I could think about bombing it to sort of save my defensive point and let my team push up. Next ability we're going to talk about is the artillery strike. So this is a little bit of a weird one because when it first came out, it was very powerful, and then it got nerfed, and now it's not very powerful. So what it does is it drops these AoE kind of circles on the map, and you can drop up to 3 at a time. Each one costs 150, so if you use all 3, it's 450 munitions, which that's an insane cost for this ability, guys. So it drops these AoE explosions inside the circle over kind of a short duration of time. The reason this was overpowered when it came out, because initially it killed garrisons. And this is kind of a weird ability to balance, because if this ability kills garrisons, it's the best ability in the game, like hands down. You can essentially take out 3 garrisons at once. But if this doesn't kill garrisons, it's essentially not that different from a strafing run, right? And we already talked about how strafing runs are really bad because killing infantry isn't that valuable. Now this is slightly better than a strafing run, but still, like, I would say on average for each of these circles, you're probably getting like 5 kills tops. A lot of times, again, you're getting less than that. And even if you were to get, let's say, 15 kills over the course of this with 3 different ones, most of the time it's not going to be worth it. That's just not going to matter over the course of a 2-minute cap on a point. They're just going to respawn again, right? So just for the cost and for what it does currently, it's not good. It costs too much, and killing infantry is not valuable enough to waste this amount of munitions. The one use I see for it is to control choke points. So I would almost never be using more than one of these at a time. But let's say, for example, on this point layout, if I killed the Gary on AA network and my team has pushed in, and I know that there's a backup Gary around Hamlet, I might want to drop it down here to cut off the sort of reinforcements as they're running back in. Even then, I don't know if I would say that this is worth it. For 150 munitions, maybe it is. It's not going to actually swing a cap. I know people are going to argue that, oh, getting those kills, that'll make a difference in the cap. It doesn't. The only time this makes a difference in a cap is like if you take out like a 20-man Gary spawn as soon as they spawn, and it's just RNG. So this is going to be, again, another controversial take, but this ability I would say is almost unplayable at this point. I would almost never be using this ability outside of if I'm dumping my munitions at the end of the game to try to swing a cap race, or maybe to try to control choke points in certain kind of map layouts where I know there's going to be like one lane that a bunch of enemies are running through. Last two abilities in the munitions section are the self-propelled artillery vehicle and artillery resupply. This artillery vehicle, it's kind of, the jury's still out on whether or not this is good. From what I've seen, this does not seem very good most of the time. It seems like static artillery is a lot better than it. It also has a very steep munitions cost. It's kind of weird that this doesn't cost fuel, right? It's 280 munitions. So I would not be spawning this. You get a default one on the map. If you scroll up here, that just spawns for free. I would be telling my artillery squads to just use that if they want to use it. The artillery resupply is good, so this refuels the ammunition for static artillery, which is the artillery gun in the HQ sector. If you have good artillery squads, you want to be using this to help them get more ammo. The last section here is our fuel section. So fuel is just used to spawn various kinds of vehicles. Fuel management is something that commanders struggle with a lot. So in a pub game, it is optimal to have heavy tanks. And with the current armor update, you can only have 2 heavy tanks on the field at once. So you always want to have fuel for heavy tanks. You want 2 on the field whenever possible. And you want fuel in reserve so that if one of them dies, you can spawn the next one. In my previous commander video, I said to only spawn heavy tanks. This is generally true, but there's nuances to it. For example, if you have a lot of armor crews and a lot of fuel, so let's say that I have 2 heavies that are already on the map, I have an armor crew using the spawned medium already, and then I have another armor crew that is telling me they want a medium tank. If I have the fuel for it, at that point it's probably fine to just spawn a medium tank. Also, if you have good tank crews and they want to be using a medium for whatever reason, or they want to be using a light tank, it's okay to just give a good tank crew whatever they want, right? If a good tank crew asks me for a Stuart, I'm giving them a Stuart. However, if I have some random solo guy that's asking for a Stuart, I'm probably telling him, no, I'm not spawning that, just use the default spawned ones when they respawn. But some commanders I see spawning way too many supply trucks, for example. Supply trucks are good. You get a spawned one, you might want another one on the map. You generally do not need more than 2 supply trucks. You want to be conserving fuel for heavies most of the time. And the last thing in the fuel section is Halftracks. So Halftrack is a spawn vehicle that once you park it, you can use it as a spawn point. So it has a 60-second spawn timer, which is the longest in the game. Garrisons are 40, outposts are 20, HQ sections 10. Halftrack's 60-second spawn timer, right, is a high cost of 300 fuel. It's more than a medium tank. People like Halftracks. Halftracks are bad, guys. You do not want to be spawning Halftracks the vast majority of the time. The reason Halftracks are bad is that it eats into your fuel. They don't do anything really that a garrison can't do. They have one advantage over Garys where you can drive them into the red zone. A red zone garrison will lock out if there's enemies within 100 meters of it, but a Halftrack will not lock out until someone's on top of it. I'm again going to talk about attacking from the red later and why that's a bad idea in general. But Halftracks are just too vulnerable to AT and to tanks. They're just generally going to be like burning 300 fuel. Okay. I know there's going to be people in the comment section talking about how you can coordinate with the team and do this and that. I really want people to listen that generally half-tracks are bad. You should just almost never be spawning a half-track. Believe me or not, but it's just I've seen so many times where commanders are spawning half-tracks and then they're screwing over their tanks because they don't have enough fuel. The only time I would ever spawn a half-track is if I have essentially unlimited fuel. Like I have 2,000 fuel. My tank crews already have their tanks. I have enough for heavies. I might spawn a half-track and use it as a secondary defensive spawn in my HQ, just because recon can't kill it, right? So if a recon team runs back there, they can kill a garrison they find. They won't be able to kill the half-track. You can use it this way, but other than that, again, you just don't want to have these on the map. They're just burning through your fuel for no reason. There's a couple of other vehicles too. A Jeep, like I said, is only 80 fuel and can be useful for just spreading explosive ammo throughout the map. You do not want to be ever spawning a transport truck in a pub game. This is a complete waste, 100 fuel. Sometimes people will get left in HQ at the beginning of the game and they'll be like, can you spawn me a transport truck? No, never do that. Just tell them to redeploy, spawn on a garrison. The next section of this video is about Garrison Networks. So building garrisons is your number one job as a commander. It is your most important job and really your only job. Squad leaders can help you to build garrisons, but they have other things that they are doing in their role as a squad leader. A commander doesn't have other stuff that they need to do. A commander's job is just to get as many garrisons on the map and continually rebuild garrisons when they get destroyed. One of the most common mistakes I see commanders making is prioritizing attacking Garys over defensive Garys. You always want to be prioritizing building defensive Garys before you focus on attacking. And not one Gary, like not one defensive Gary, not two, not three. You want to have probably 4 to 5 defensive Garys at any given time, so that when you start losing them and when the enemies start pushing in from different directions, you have access to those areas to snuff out their attack. A very common thing I'll see is like one defensive Gary gets built, and then there's a bunch of red zone Garys and attacking Garys, and your team all goes to those attacking Garys and defense gets overrun. So for example, if I was playing this point layout, I'd want a garrison here, I'd want another one here, I'd think about having one here as well, and I would be scattering them throughout the defensive sector as well. So I have like 2 to 3 in this locked defensive sector. I'd want them something maybe here, something here, something like this, just kind of spread out in a web around my point, and then spreading out in the direction of the attacking point as well. So if I had a garrison here, this would be your primary attacking garrison for this point layout, between the 2 points on the border, access into Hamlet. I'd then want to have probably one over around here, would be like the farthest east I want to go. You could potentially have one here as well, just again a web of garrisons all throughout the points. Another note about garrisons is that they can be built 200 meters apart. So on the map, 200 meters is one of these squares, right? So as you can see, I'm kind of at the center of here. If I ping here, this is going to be about 200 meters, right? Also, in the north-south direction, that's going to be around 200 meters. And for anybody that knows their geometry, diagonally across is not 200 meters. This is actually closer to 280 meters, I believe. 200 meters diagonally is going to be a little less than the square, so something like that is going to be around 200 meters. Another important nuance of garrison placement is that you need to be thinking about, when you're placing a garrison, is that going to lock out areas for the second garrison and the next garrison, right? You have to be thinking about the whole network when you're placing the Garys. So for example, if I place a Gary right here, right, it's going to not allow me, it's going to be too close to allow me to build this Gary. You'd have to build the next one back here, and then you might be too close to build another Gary over here. You'd have to build it further this way and so on. So if you have garrisons placed poorly, it can kind of have this cascading effect of not allowing other good garrisons to get made. So this is something that you have to be thinking about. Use that 200-meter line as your kind of guide when you're looking at the map. Just be thinking about, when I build this Gary, is it going to lock out another important Gary? Probably the biggest commander mistake I see related to garrisons is related to red zone Garys. Now, I get a lot of pushback from people when I say this, and again, you can take it or leave it as far as my advice about this, but red zone Garys actively lose you the game most of the time that you use them. And there's a few different reasons for this. One, the first reason, just strategy-wise, is that when you build a red zone Gary, so for example, I build one out here, right? Let's say I build a Gary out here. People that spawn here are now disconnected from my defensive point and my front line. So when I take resources away from, let's say I have my frontline attacking Garys and I have this line, right, that's pressing into the hamlet and coming up against the enemy line. When I take resources away from this line to my red zone, it weakens the front line. Okay, suddenly there's just less people. There is a finite amount of people in the game. If you take them away from one place to another place, it weakens the other place, right? So when this flank starts to happen, now the enemy is more able to overrun the front line and also get into the defensive sector. When you're pushing from the blue like this, you are essentially attacking and defending at the same time. I am pushing into the enemy team, and I'm also preventing them from accessing my defensive sector. This flank just opens up the opportunity for the enemies to start pushing in. It's kind of like, if you imagine like a boxing analogy, if you try to throw this like hook, this kind of looping hook, the straight punch between the 2 points of the enemies is going to sometimes connect before your hook connects, right? Another part of this is that when you remove infantry from your frontline and defensive sector, it weakens your armor's ability to operate in the blue. So armor doesn't have the choice of like teleporting into the red, right? Like they're driving up from HQ. Sometimes armor will flag, that's a whole other problem. But if they're trying to get to Hamlet, and I don't have control of this area, they're going to get harassed by enemy infantry on the way up. They're going to get marked for enemy tanks. So the ideal is that you have this coordinated push where your infantry is pushing and the armor is pushing alongside of them. Now, people will say, well, for the red zone, I'm just going to tell my team that only a few people can go use the red zone so that we don't lose control of this defensive sector. The problem is, in a pub game, that you don't have any direct control over who goes to the red zone. And the psychology of players is that when they see this red zone spawn, they've got killed by artillery over here a couple times, or they've been fighting over this area for a while and they're not making progress, they're going to think, okay, I can go here, I'll shoot some people in the back, get some easy kills, have some fun that way. A lot of people are going to go to this spawn. Like, if this spawn is available, people are going to use it whether you want them to or not. Even if you can get some buy-in from your command chat, like the squad leaders, some of them at least agree that, yeah, I'm not going to use it. Their squads, the random blueberries, the people that don't have mics, they're not going to listen to this. They're just going to go. So essentially, in a pub game, you cannot give your team an option to do this. If you give them the option, they're going to take it every single time. I've seen this in a million games, right? So you have to just not create the spawn. You have to just create blue zone spawns, force them onto the areas of the map where they want to be, or where you want them to be, and not give any opportunity to weaken the front line like this. I would just urge people to start paying attention to their games. To see how often when a red zone garrison or multiple red zone garrisons get made that your defensive sector gets lost, just start paying attention to it. I can guarantee you will start seeing that there are many games where a red zone Gary gets made and like 5-10 minutes later you're losing your defensive point. And this is another thing where people get confused about this because red zone Garys, when you're on the better team in a pub game, there's often again this imbalance between teams where a lot of high level players might be on one team and there's worse players on the other team. If you're on the good team, red zone Garys can really accelerate your ability to win, right? Like you can stomp bad teams in 20 minutes because they're not paying attention, you build the red zone Gary and then you just win the game instantly, right? This does not mean that this is a good strategy, and the problem is that when you're on the bad team or when the teams are even, for all the reasons that I've described, having the red zone actually weakens your team and accelerates you losing your defensive point, right? So this is kind of the logical fallacy people run into where the strategy that might work against bad players and cause these like 20-minute steamrolls causes you to lose the game versus even teams or against a better team. So in summary, that's my thoughts on Garrison Networks. You want to be building defensive spawns first. You want to be building as many blue zone Garys as possible. You want to be attacking from the blue, pushing between the 2 points, and you want to be avoiding red zone Garys most of the time. The only scenario, if you have like 7 Garys up, you have complete control of your defensive sector, you can think about building a red zone Gary. Even then, it's possible that by doing that, you weaken your front line and start losing your frontline Garys. Last section here is going to be about just generally how to use the role in game and about communication. So I have kind of just like a script that I go through at the beginning of each commander game. I'm going to leave my spawn supply truck for either engineers that want to build nodes or supplies for squad leaders that want to build Garys. I'm going to wait. I'm going to spawn the first supply truck for myself, and I'm going to use that supply truck to build defensive Garys around my 4th point. I'm going to use my first supply drop ability to try to build the launch garrison to attack mid. So I would drop it here if I was playing this point layout. My first supply drop is going to go there. I'm going to build 2 defensive Garys with my first 2 supply drops. So I'll probably build one, I would build one around cattle sheds, and I would probably build a backup around here. And then I'm going to go resupply my supply truck and build 2 more garrisons, either defensively or potentially another attacking Gary, like I might build one over here. If we win the cap, my second supply drop, or it seems like we're winning, my second supply drop is going for the first garrison on midpoint, and I'm bringing my supply truck up probably to build garrisons in that sector. If we're losing the cap, I'm just building more defensive Garys on my 4th point, and I'm probably going to also potentially use the second supply drop in my final point sector, just because you can't drop supplies in warfare with a supply truck in your first 2 sectors. You can only drop it in the further sectors from that. So you kind of need to use a supply drop unless you have like a random support player in your defensive sector. You always want to have at least 1 garrison in your backup defensive sector. So like what I mean by that is I always want to, if I control dugout, I always want to have 1 Gary in cattle sheds at least, probably more than that. Like technically this could, these garrisons survive if we lose dugout, but you always want to have a backup garrison. A problem I see from a lot of commanders is that they'll be like 90% losing their dugout point, and then they don't have a Gary on cattle, and then they drop supplies on cattle. Your brain cannot work in slow motion like that. You got to get ahead of what's happening. You got to kind of predict what's happening. You need defensive garrisons like before you need them, right? You don't want to be scrambling to get garrisons up after you already are in danger and need them. Then for the rest of the game as commander, I'm building garrisons. I'm either driving a supply truck around, or I am patrolling my defensive sector, dropping supplies, rebuilding garrisons. If you have 8 garrisons up, one of the useful things you can do as commander is just to kind of hide near a backup defensive Gary. So for example, this garrison, this is an area called Gardens. It's very, very important for this point layout. If I have 7 to 8 Garys up, I'm going to be probably just like hiding near this. And then when recon or somebody gets on it, I'm going to pop out and kill them and just hide, right? I'm never, as commander, going into the red zone, like ever. Unless it's like the last 2 minutes of the game and we're trying to attack, I am not going into the red zone as a commander. I'm patrolling around the defense. I'm maintaining the defensive garrison network for the whole game. And then communication is another topic that, communication, just like in real life, it's different for different people. People have different kind of communication styles. There's different ways you can communicate with your team as commander. I would say that generally you don't need to micromanage very much. Again, you don't need to be trying to tell people what to do too much. The main things I'm talking about as commander. First of all, like primary thing, I'm just trying to be a positive influence on the command chat. I'm telling people like good job and thank you when they do things that I want them to do. I'm just trying to like kind of keep morale up. You don't want, like, the worst thing in this game is like the whiny, passive aggressive commander, right? You want to just be generally having a good relationships with your squad leaders, right? And that doesn't always happen. It's an online video game. You're not always going to get the cream of the crop when it comes to positive interactions and all that, but you generally just want to be positive, right? The other like strategy things that I'm communicating about is garrisons. Again, primary goal, right? Getting garrisons up. I'm asking people to drop supplies for Garys. I'm asking people to build Garys on my supply drops. I'm also marking things for my team. So if my teammate tells me there's a garrison on this mark, I'm marking it to show that my team, like the rest of the team, can see my marks. They can't always see the other marks from other squad leaders. Well, squad leaders can, but the blueberries can't. So I'm marking garrisons, I'm marking armor. I'm talking to my armor players, I'm spawning them tanks, and I'm calling for defensive spawns when I need them. If you're playing the game the way that I'm describing, it is not usually necessary to have a lot of people like full-time defense, right? Because again, if you're playing the game the way I'm talking about, you're defending and you're attacking at the same time, it is difficult for the enemy to be sneaking into your defensive point. And if your line is winning, especially if like the enemy's doing their like flanking bullshit, right? You're not going to need people standing around on defense. It's helpful to have people patrolling around the defensive sector. So sometimes if somebody wants to play defense, I'll tell them to do that. But generally, I'm not like telling my squads what to do without them asking. I'm not micromanaging. I won't say no to defensive squads, but I'm not, just constantly talking in command chat telling people what to do. It's not necessary. So I would just say the number one thing about communication is just being positive, being a good leader in that way. I know this is like, we're talking about hellletloose, it's not that serious, right? But you just generally don't want to be a dick, right? It is your job as the commander to try to maintain kind of a positive atmosphere in the command chat. And that's like the number one thing you want to be doing. So in summary, I'm minimizing communication to just kind of necessary stuff around coordinating spawns and armor and marks on the map, being positive. In the game, I'm walking around my defensive sector, building and maintaining the defensive garrison network, and sometimes I'll be driving a supply truck around for the same purpose. And if I have all of my garrisons up, I'm just defending important garrisons from recon teams and other like random flankers, just identifying any threats to my defensive sector, and just generally kind of keeping track of any potential risk that might arise. If you give your team enough time and you just don't lose the game. If you just defend your point, they will eventually attack the next point and succeed. And that is it for my commander guide. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to ask them in the comment section of this video. I try to respond to everybody. I might update this over the course of time. There might be other things to add as the game changes and gets updated. But for the beginning of 2026, this is my opinion about the optimal way to play the role of commander. Like and subscribe to the videos, guys. I appreciate all the support.